Nina Hirota, adjunct faculty with New York University since 2013, and former talent leader with companies such as Centene WellCare Health Plans, Unisys, the World Bank, among others. Nina, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to our virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Maisa and Delia. Well, first and foremost, it is a tremendous pleasure to be a part of the event, and I really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining today as well. I am passionate about talent management and the role that leaders play in not just making, but unfortunately at times breaking organizations. And in my opinion, this is a role that will be ever more important as we transition to the next normal or the next abnormal, as some say. My goal today is to share a fresh business case to which I had a direct contribution. And it is about a Fortune 200 healthcare insurance company and how they aligned talent management and the whole function in order to generate results. I have reserved a few minutes towards the end for Q&A, but I prefer more interactive types of sessions. So rather than talking at you, I invite you to interact by posting your comments, any questions on the chat, and I will, of course, do my best to follow, and trust that Maisa and Delia will be paying close attention as well. If you, of course, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible in the end, but if you enjoy the presentation or have unanswered questions, feel free to connect directly via LinkedIn. Okay, so with that, let's first take a look at the people who are represented here. I always love the wisdom of the crowds. And if you will, please post on the chat, how focused on talent management and learning is your company now compared to last year? It could be, of course, a negative percentage, but please post a percentage in the chat. %20 more, a lot more. Caroline and Diane say. Jessica, much more. This is very encouraging. Let's see if anybody is posting their perspective. Vida says about the same. Anybody else? Let's give it a second. Kirk, wow, 90 to 100% more. Very exciting. Feels like you're today's winner. Julia says, started a full court press on talent management last year. Be curious, Julia, if what you started is being adjusted post-COVID or if the plan remains the same. Companies built solely on this premise. Oh, fantastic, folks. This is just so exciting. Because if you look at the quotes we have on the left, a lot of what we are observing in these webinars and newsletters and you know, the information that comes at us, right, is that there's this huge and concerning focus on managing people more from a headcount and cost perspective for sakes of survival. And yet, we have been for years discussing the importance of appropriately managing talent and having talent as an asset, as much as physical assets in the knowledge economy, right? So what I read in the media sometimes is concerning to me, and one of my purposes in presenting this question is to raise awareness and bring us back together with focus on what matters and what's important for an organization's strategy versus being short-sighted with what we are seeing out there, right? Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and the chat. All right. So with that, I'm very encouraged already. Let me talk a bit about the case. So the company in case is a Fortune 200 healthcare insurance company that had remarkable growth since its foundation in the mid-'80s, got listed in the New York Stock Exchange, grew to 4 million members, 10,000 employees, and nearly 17 billion in revenue by 2017. Okay. They had great leaders, a phenomenal CEO who last year was nominated one of the best CEOs by Glassdoor, to give you a sense, and extremely competitive, continuously raised the bar and business goals. And at the time, they established that by 2022, they wanted to ensure sustained growth when of 100% of their rebids, fully integrate their acquisitions, ensure continuous improvement of the member experience, and of course, continue to rank higher in all of the national rankings in the industry, right? Now, the problem with doing so, or the opportunity, I'll say, is, and the realization was that they lacked talent to support growth. And up until last year, you will all remember the competition for talent was fierce, right? At the time, meaning 2017, talent acquisition had over 3,000 open requisitions, and they couldn't get people in as fast as needed. There were issues with the skills that some candidates lacked, or with the positions that were harder to fill. So it was time to add greater focus to the borrow and build portion of the buy, borrow, build analogy. And by the way, if something I learned recently, the term buy, borrow, or build became very popular among talent practitioners, but I never knew the origin. And it was in fact coined or became popular after the launch of a book titled Build, Borrow, Solving the Growth Dilemma in 2012. So it's fairly recent. And I particularly like it because it's easy to remember and to explain to those who are less familiar with talent management practices. Buy, borrow, build, very simple, right? And in the case of this company, it was time to focus, to give greater focus on the borrow and build. And we have a tendency when we think about talent strategies and initiatives to think that they're somewhat linear and sequential, progressive, right? Task 1, task 2, task 3. So I added this timeline to give you a sense that things happen in alignment, in complete alignment, I'll say, but at times they started independently. And the best analogy I would offer is the Chinese spinning plates. You know, you put one in motion, you put it to spin, then you add another, and then next you do is tap the previous one and the other one and the other one, and you go running all of the different plates, because you don't want any to follow and break, right? So the timeline for us was quite interesting, because you would, of course, start with the outstanding, very strong C-level engagement, but all together, you couldn't just wait until you had one thing and the next and the next. And in just a window of, I would say, 2 years or so, we were able to accomplish quite a lot. I'm going to talk about some of these steps you see on this slide and the next slides. But what I'd like to emphasize here is the vital, and I'll say again, vital importance of broad stakeholder engagement in order for any talent initiative to succeed, or change initiative to succeed. We had a C-level and executive sponsorship. Our C-level leaders would welcome and engage in talent initiatives at any time. You would knock on the door, ask them to kick off something, to sponsor a project, and this and that, and they would not hesitate. But this wasn't enough. We often overemphasize that part, but I believe that the secret sauce to the success of this particular company was the fact that we had a broad stakeholder engagement. So for instance, we partnered across HR, involving talent acquisition, of course, the talent management team, HR BPs, and even comp and benefits, to ensure that the incentives, systems, assessments, and learning were cohesively aligned. And we also partnered with external vendors to ensure that what we brought enabled the right development and the right metrics. I can tell from the comments in the chat earlier on that we all recognize that metrics, KPIs, and showing the results of everything we do is a matter of survival in our business, right? And I think that we will all agree that just level 1 satisfaction surveys on butts per seat are no longer proving the value that we're bringing to the business. So our metrics must be aligned with business priorities, and a great part of stakeholder engagement enabled us not only to set better metrics, but that get clear data, and of course, be able to proudly report on the results. Okay. Any questions before I move forward? Please post it on the chat at any time. I'm keeping an eye on it, as I promised. All right. So please don't worry. I'm not going to read through this entire slide. I know it's very busy. I have it there just to align us all around what it takes to implement a robust succession planning. And succession planning is just one of the things that we did, if you recall the previous slide, right? So we implemented all of the critical steps of succession planning that you see here on the left side of this slide. So starting with demand, looking at supply, calibrating, establishing action plans for all of the stakeholders involved, looking at multiple scenarios, and then evaluating, right? It feels like a lot, and it was a lot, and we did it very fast in partnership with our stakeholders, as I just mentioned, with the goal of moving through the talent maturity model, talent management maturity model that was developed by Josh Bursing, I would say a few years back, because we wanted to reach level 4 and become an inclusive talent system, one that will be integrated in the organizational culture, one that would be inclusive, diversity-driven, and which would be pretty much a great contributor to the business results, right? And I will tell you that very proudly that I believe that we did get to level 4 very fast, very rapidly, thanks to all of the simultaneous efforts, all of the engagement that we were able to align. But I would say that we did a good job when it comes to diversity, and I think that there's yet additional opportunities to broaden diversity, especially when it comes to critical role succession. But that seems to be the eternal conundrum when it comes to critical roles and executive succession. I just saw an article with Forbes the other day raving about the fact that we had more women represented at C-level, but there's yet a lot of work that can be done there, right? And let me now talk about what we did to make talent development and succession stick. Seems very simple because you only see 4 things in this slide, but we all know it is common understanding that leaders impact the bottom line in any organization, irrespective of industry and size. And recent studies, there was one by Harvard and the Hay Group, right, show how compelling that relationship is. The study in question describes how managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee performance and engagement, which in turn accounts for 30% of bottom line financial results. So if you think about that statistically for a moment, right, leaders have a tremendous role in a business performance and results just by appropriately managing their teams and their performance. Just by that. It's not just about the numbers, it's through the people, right? Again, knowledge economy, right? And back then, interestingly, the CEO articulated that every employee deserved a great leader. Not just an okay one, not just a good one, but a great one. That became the tagline for everything we did at the time. And we also established some measures of success for our team and the KPIs that we were going to follow. Very, very simply put, and I'll talk about it in a bit, we were looking into internal mobility, which could be a combination of both employees who were selected for an open position or employees promoted in their same line, and then bench strength, right? And in which case, for VP and above, it was a 2-part goal where they needed to conduct a talent review and identify successors, ready now or ready later, but namely identify successors. And for directors and senior directors, they were expected to conduct talent reviews and focus on the development of successors for critical roles, okay? And of course, this was all new and a learning curve for the enterprise. So in order to achieve those KPIs, all of the people leaders received specific activities such as sourcing, coaching, onboarding, how to set better goals, communication, recognition, engagement. All of those activities were presented in a very simple guide, almost a list, as leading indicators to help them increase the likelihood of achieving the KPIs I just mentioned, so internal mobility and bench strength, right? And we communicated that every leader's overall performance, as you see at the bottom left of this slide, was a result of not just performance in the business goals, say for instance, achieving a percentage in increase in sales, but it was also a result of that plus demonstrated leadership behaviors, including the activities that I just mentioned, right? And then, of course, we ensured that HR, direct managers, and successors were clear about their roles. And ultimately, all of the efforts you see in this virtual circle produced accountability. And I would say that accountability became something almost ingrained in the culture. It was already very strong in the organization's culture, but it became even more so when it came to leadership development and to ensuring that we would attract and develop and retain, buy, borrow, build talent in the organization to sustain its growth. Now, let me talk a bit about what we did when it comes to learning and development. We shifted from face-to-face, ad hoc training down to 100% online and scalable. And in doing so, we enabled we were able to offer development irrespective of growth, right? The online options were outstanding. There was very, very little internal design for the online programs, if at all, when it comes to leadership development. We pretty much leveraged the best content from various vendors. There's excellent content out there, including LinkedIn Learning, Harvard. Most people tend to think about Harvard as Harvard Managed Mentor. Well, there's a lot more to Harvard than that. They do have customized programs. And in fact, I'll say content was not really the problem. What was the challenge for our team in talent was the selection, and I'll say the consistency of everything that we offered to all levels. And we spent significant time designing, customizing, curating content, sorting through what one vendor and the other vendor and this third vendor offered to ensure that leaders were developed for the challenge of not just their respective levels, but that they could seek to close the gaps for their next move with content that evolved all along in terms of complexity and breadth. So it was quite an interesting exercise. And as you can see on the slide, we were very pleased that resulted in an average overall rating of 4.4 on a scale of 0 to 5 in the first year already. So the concern that going completely online could actually turn attention down from learning to something else was exactly the opposite. People were happy to have on time, on demand types of learning, be able to learn at a time that was more convenient for them. At times they would take a break at work or use the lunchtime. There were some groups that started taking programs or courses together and would collaborate and discuss additional ways to apply what they learned to a given challenge or to their work. So it became quite fluid in the organization. One of the programs that we designed, I wanted to highlight this one in particular, was the CEO Challenge. And this program combined a team project, which theme was selected by a C-level executive. It had to be a real business problem. Thank you, John, for your question. I hope I answer it now. It had to be a real and relevant business problem, so a C-level executive would select it. And the participants, we would form teams, and participants would work on that, on their respective challenges within a few months, in this case in particular 6 months. They would also receive online executive education. We would pair them up with internal advisors who were leaders inside the organization from the areas that were related to the challenge that was at hand. In Shark Tank style, they would present their recommendations with the goal of implementing something concrete and, of course, relevant to the business, which was the whole reason why it started in the first place, right? The program was such a success, not just internally, but externally, that we received an innovation award back in 2018. So quite an interesting experience where we were able to combine different resources, internal and external, in order to obtain the results. And indeed, there were projects that were implemented. Let's take a moment to again benefit from the wisdom of this group here. Delia is going to launch a poll. Oops. With a question. Let me go back for a moment. I apologize. So, what is your organization's top talent priority for the next 12 months? Let's take a pause here. Another moment. And you see that you have a few, but if you have another, please post in the group chat. We would love to learn about it. Give it once, twice. Delia, whenever you're ready, can I just submit? Perfect. Look at that. Quite interesting. So 1/3 is focusing on upskilling their employees and focusing in L&D in new technologies. I couldn't agree more. I mean, in just the 2 years we launched this entire suite of learning and talent, I would say that so much else has come out, especially leveraging technology. Great to see that attraction is still a priority. But it's interesting that all else is a bit of a split, right? We have people working on succession planning, organizational design. I think that that's going to be extremely important as people rethink the capabilities needed for the next normal. Apurva saying building skills for the future is a key priority. Absolutely, Apurva. Julia's saying mapping education, training, and experience requirements. The sub-developmental career paths. What, Julia, say more about sub-developmental. I love what you're all saying, because we are, as we should be, in the learning industry, looking, being future-oriented. And it is refreshing that you're already thinking how to bounce forward. Okay. Please continue to post on the chat. This is just so encouraging. I think it's the best moment I've had when it comes to looking at the perspective in talent in the past couple of months. All right, so let's move on to results. I think you're probably curious about where we got with all of those efforts, right? One thing I am particularly proud of is how we ingrained talent and pipeline discussions into HR. My team, talent acquisition, and HR VPs met bi-weekly to talk about critical roles that were open or that would be opening. And we then reviewed our list of executive high potentials and successors, identified successors, in light of their career aspirations, mobility, readiness, development, taken or needed, and positions that we had targeted for them. And so we could each leave with the meeting with respective action items. Now, I'll say that the matrix you see illustrated in this slide is pretty simple, and I'm yet to see a system that allows seeing so many indicators all together. We developed an Excel file, folks, an Excel file to cross-reference all of the items I just described. And the reason being, we wanted to have a clear perspective of where we stood, who was in the pipeline, who could be next in line. Thank you, Julia. Professional development for future positions. Who could be next in line? And of course, what was the assessment about readiness? We also did something, for purposes of this matrix, we also did something pretty simple, and yet I see organizations that will not do for a variety of reasons, but which I think is very important. We shared the critical roles list with the successors and asked them which positions they were interested in, if they were mobile or willing to relocate. When would that be? If not now, and potentially a little later in a year or up to 18 months, when? And of course, if not at all, that helped us understand that that person was a talent that would have to be matched with opportunities that would only be local. And it made us stop the guessing game, right? A lot of organizations tend to identify successors and think that because they believe the individual is a perfect fit for position A, sometimes they miss the perspective that the individual would be more interested in position B at location C, and we end up losing the talent that we grew. So we took the guessing component of it, and we also asked them what development options would help them close any gaps for the positions they aspired for. Was it coaching? Was it mentoring? Could be a developmental assignment, could be shadowing someone, could be becoming the company representative at one of the entities where that we were affiliated with. So basically, this gave us transparency, and the discussions we had with such a simple matrix were extremely rich. And because we met bi-weekly, this became very much a part of what the entire HR and talent function got involved in. Okay, let me take a look at my comments here for a moment. Julia is sharing that they have a data management intern who's developing searchable databases for them, as well as dashboards for senior leaders. Very interesting, Julia. I'm sure a lot of people in this webinar would be interested in learning more. So perhaps you could share your LinkedIn information on the chat. I myself will. All right. And well, this is just one of the things that we did in order to get results, right? So I promised you earlier I was going to talk about what we were measuring, our indicators in more detail. Well, basically we were monitoring employee opinion surveys, because if leaders were improving, the easiest way to spot that would be the surveys we conducted on a regular basis, right? Turnover, another big indicator. It's been said that people leave their managers, not their jobs, not their companies, right? Bench strength. And of course, if we were really getting traction with successor movement. And in the window between late 2017 and end of 19, I'm happy to report that we had an overall increase in employee opinion survey ratings, including from participants from the acquired companies. Overall, we had a 90% retention of internal critical role successors. We also increased the diversity among successors. We were able to reach nearly 20% representation, even though I said earlier the company wanted to continue to improve in that area. Approximately 60% we attained approximately 60% overall bench strength. I'm giving you approximations in order to preserve confidentiality, of course, but these are fairly close. And of course, there was greater critical role successor movement as the process evolved. And at the end of 2019, about 40% of the successors that had been identified had achieved sorry, let me explain that again. In 2019, about 16% of the successors had a career movement, and of the 16, over 40% achieved the targeted role. So that told us that we were doing things right. Not only we were getting career mobility right, we're moving people to the positions they aspired for, or they were a fit for. And this is what we reported to the board. Okay. With that, and before we move to Q&A, I'd like to run one last poll question. So on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the highest, how accountable are managers for talent in your company? Please vote. All right, so I'm closing the poll now. Let's take a look at those results. Excellent. Let's see. Well, everybody is, thankfully, above 4, but nobody feels they're a 10, interestingly. But the majority is saying 8. 8 is excellent, folks. 8 is excellent. Holding managers accountable for talent, grooming, development, acquisition is extremely important. This is not and should never be an HR only role, right? And I think that we are evolving fast and steady. Excellent. Thank you for your vote. And I think we can now open for Q&A. I'm ready for you. So please post your questions which is the preference, Maisa?
I have 3 questions that I got, but let's see if anyone else has any questions they'd like to send in. We can wait a minute and see. All right, so let me ask the first question, and then we'll see if people have any other follow-up questions. So, Nina, one question we had was, all things possible, what would you do differently?
I would engage even more stakeholders, and I would network more and more. I would really be out there more. We were just so busy with everything that was going on. There was a period where we were a bit self-centered. I think this is natural. You get so laser focused that you tend to pay attention to the deliverables and the plates that are spinning, going back to the Chinese plate model. But technology is evolving too fast. Every day there's something new. There's a new app. There are new things out, and new business models, new jobs, even new titles, right? Yeah. So I would have wanted to spend more time out there, and do if starting over, I would do a few things differently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then I think another question is, can you talk about lessons learned from this case? Anything that really, made you think about the lessons learned from this case study?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think it's 2 things. Most of the literature we see when it comes to large cultural change, and especially broad range interventions like this, talks about getting executive buy-in, right? We had that from the get-go. We were lucky, but even though people say that you should communicate, I will tell you, people learn different ways. People understand different things, even though they're in the same room listening to the same thing. And they can be auditory, visual, kinesthetic. So repetition is fundamental, especially when you're talking about cultural change, and you can never, ever over-communicate.
Yes, great points, great points. I think, let's see if we have any other questions, but I think if not, then I'd like to wrap up and just say that if you do think of any other questions, or if you'd like to chat with Nina, like she said herself, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'll be happy to do that. And thank you again, Nina, for such a fantastic case study.